For this session, we have the panel of speakers, and we have microphones. So rather than stand up and hope people can hear you, we'll pass you a microphone when you want to speak, and then we can all hear what your question is. Okay, so we're going to make a start. Who's got the roving microphone? Right, thank you, Mark. So can we have our first question, please? Yes.
Mark Stevenson, Chartered Building Surveyor. There was one word I didn't hear in any of the talks today, which is quite an important one: methane. I understand that 40% of methane production in the UK is produced by farms. Is there any way we can look at some instigations or investigations into methane capture? I know they put cows in sheds through the winter. Is there a way of capturing the methane?
We're all trying to not take this one.
Interesting question. I mean, there's a spectrum, isn't there, in the environmental movement from the George Monbiots who say, well, it's simple, you just stop farming livestock, which isn't going to go down particularly well in this part of the world, and it's not my view, all the way through to BAU, business as usual, which I don't think we can have for biodiversity reasons, or indeed methane as well. All the studies that I'm aware of show that when cattle are as grass-fed as possible, you reduce the inputs, you move them frequently, and you feed them as little over the winter as possible on silage, which is possible, albeit difficult. You dramatically reduce methane production. It's partly what we're giving our cattle and what we're not giving them. Certainly would ease the problem. Downscaling livestock numbers is a conversation I've had with landowners and farmers in the last 2 days, and people are amenable to fewer, better livestock, provided they can make it work financially. And they're also amenable to diversification. In other words, they are offsetting the reduction in livestock through other income streams on their farms and estates. I think the problem has to be tackled incrementally, otherwise you risk cliff edging people's jobs and livelihoods. And it is a difficult one to answer, frankly, but I think shifting cattle in particular back towards a more naturalistic diet, an older way of feeding them and moving them and grazing them, the good old days, the James Rebanks approach, is a very sound intermediary step, in my view.
Yeah, I do work on a part-time on a hill farm in the national park, and their cows are outdoors all year. And I think the farmers there, they recognise that by farming their livestock in that way, with fewer inputs, grass-fed completely, so there's no silage, it's helping to reduce the impact of methane and cows kept indoors in the winter time. So it's happening on a small scale. Whether it happens on a larger scale, we'll have to wait and see what the future holds in that respect.
Just to add, I think it's about food chains, and it's about people's eating habits and how much meat they eat. And I think it's going to be a case of less meat, but better quality meat, less often, and less mass-produced meat. But that's a whole shift in culture. But I think it's something we're going to have to think about.
Yeah, sorry, David and I will introduce ourselves as well. I'm Chris Woodley-Stewart. I'm speaking later. And
David Morris, I'm Area Operations Manager for RSPB.
Thank you very much. So just so you're wondering who we were, there is another side to this, which we have a spiralling global population. And so if every solution is all about less of something, and people have cows so that you can drink milk or you can eat meat, so we will have to eat less meat. But then again, turning large swathes of land over to soy production can be as damaging as turning large swathes of land over to ranching cattle in South America. So there are going to have to be some really serious technological solutions for this, and we can't shy away from them because there are more and more of us all the time. We're all living longer, which is great, especially as I feel I'm getting older. I like the idea that we're living longer. But we are going to have some serious technological solutions, because it can't always be, well, we'll have a bit less of this or a bit less of that, because there are more of us.
Yeah, I think another important factor is about understanding the carrying capacity of your land and the ability to, the amount of livestock you can hold. There's a really good report done a few years ago called Less is More that looks at a break-even point within a farm business where you're really looking at the sort of raw materials and the carrying capacity of the land that you've got. So in order to kind of maximise its kind of output in terms of ecological or kind of food products, it's about ensuring that what you're putting in there is yielding a return financially and isn't losing money, because I think that's a really important point with more and more with kind of particularly marginal farming, is kind of really understanding the economics around it. There was a DEFRA study done a few years ago that showed 17% of farmers in the less favoured areas, these are these sort of marginal areas which Northumberland's kind of within the kind of uplands, have any form of sort of business metrics or kind of understanding around those sort of economics. And I think one of the ways often I kind of with the team is kind of understanding about delivering sort of more for nature and biodiversity is also helping farmers, land managers understand the economics around their business as well. So that drives change as much as that sort of desired innate passion in many farmers to deliver for nature as well. So if you can marry up the carrying capacity of that land, really understand the sort of fixed and variable losses on that farm business of how much you're putting in there for the yield, that can be quite seismic in terms of the changes that makes. Then you start to layer in some of the other economics that are developing that Ben touched on this morning around things like carbon and things like that. I mean, one guy I work with is running kind of a carbon neutral beef regime now, where he's done lots of peat restoration, huge amounts of woodland creation, reduced the overall herd size down, but it's producing really high quality premium beef, which he's getting a high value for in kind of Michelin starred restaurants down in London, places like that, getting a really good return for the environment, but getting a good financial return as well. And I think that's going to be one of the kind of key successes of driving down some of those kind of emissions like methane and kind of reducing and getting towards sort of net zero and those sort of initiatives.
Next question, please. Did that answer your question?
Not particularly, because I use the term methane capture. One of the answers.
Yes. Yeah.
Give anything regarding carbon capture.
I think it's
Well, you said carbon then, so do you mean carbon or methane?
Methane capture.
That's why I was saying I think there need to be some technological solutions that aren't about less.
Yeah, I think as Chris said in his answer, the technology is catching up, I think, and technology will drive solutions in the longer term, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
My worry is only 11%.
Hang on, we'll give you the microphone. Yeah.
As I understand it, only 11% of methane capture comes from the fossil fuel industry. And we see the fossil fuel industry as a really bad, dirty, awful industry. Yet the biggest producer is the farming industry. And if we don't wake up to this issue, then people will come round to the fact that farms are really the dirty producers of methane.
Okay.
It's only because it's totally natural, you know.
Yeah.
Cows do this stuff. But what I said about sheds, you can have ventilators and you can capture this gas before it goes into the atmosphere. And that gas has an absolute total value in resale. And I just think it needs to be a debate that has to happen with the farmers before it gets a bad name.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. All good comments. And thank you for your question. Next question, please. Come on, there must be loads. You've had lots of information today. Oh, Mark?
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Martin Swinbank. I'm a local councillor in Alnwick, part of the A1B, stretches through my patch. Question slightly prompted by Ian was with regard to kind of messiness and the kind of messiness around the edges. And councils have a real problem with this, I think, in terms of glyphosating around every lamppost, along every kind of wall, etc., etc. And sometimes farmers come take the same kind of view that everything has to be very, very tidy. We've heard quite a lot with regard to we need to bring that kind of messiness back into landscape, probably back into our towns and our villages as well. So I wonder what the panel thinks about how we move that kind of Overton window. How do we get people to accept messiness as being a positive rather than a negative? And in my own kind of experience, I found that it's very mixed at the moment. We try and put leave longer grass in town and village places, and some people really like that and they understand. But other people say, well, why isn't the council doing its job properly? Why haven't they cut the grass? And it's that kind of dichotomy at the moment that we need to move beyond. And I'm a Green councillor, so you can see where I'm coming from. But we need to move beyond that. And how do we do it?
Okay, well, I did a chapter on this in Rebirding, but when I wrote Rebirding, I talked about ecological tidiness disorder, the insane desire to tidy every last inch of space, and I was basing quite a lot of it quite pointedly on my hometown of Thornbury in South Gloucestershire, and the book was read by the local council lady responsible for the tidying budget, and I thought, okay, let's see what happens. 2 years later, whether it was anything to do with my book or not, we have around the edges of Thornbury, which is a classic, very tidy southern English town, tidier than your average sort of northern English town, and that's a compliment to northern England, by the way, before anyone punches me. And there are now large banks adjoining all the new housing estates that are entirely fallow. They've been seeded with wildflower seed, and the only sign is a butterfly. It's a wooden butterfly sign that says, "We live here." Now, if you pass a wooden butterfly sign, you've got to really go out of your way to then say to the council, can you please mow the butterflies and the bees? Because butterflies and bees are positive, even though long verges are negative, the strange psychology of the modern British. And they've stayed, and they're absolutely thriving with grasshoppers this year. And the starlings, particularly the house sparrows, are now able to nest even on these brand new housing estates, and house martins as well, because there is this extraordinary buzz of trophic bioabundance next to the housing estate. So the housing estate has kind of offset itself through this linear scruffiness along the verge. On the other side of the verge, half of it's cut, and some non-glyphosate cutting can be useful because there are pasture-feeding species like starling, missel thrush, green woodpecker, robin that actually like it short. But then there's the long stuff for the other sort of insectivorous gleaners like house sparrows, and you often see goldfinch going in there as well. So the saving the council has made by doing this is astronomical. They are no longer paying for likely carcinogen, the glyphosate, to be used. They have nice butterfly signs up. Kids can see and hear bees on the way to school. And nobody seems to be complaining anymore. Or if they are, they look increasingly isolated and odd, and nobody listens to them. My view is if you actually polled most people rather than the vociferous minority, most people would prefer to have scruffy margins, bees and butterflies than ecocidal glyphosate oblivion. However, there are a small minority of people who really like things to be manicured to the last degree. My view is we live in a democracy. The council has an obligation to listen to the majority, but we should all believe in demonstration is more positive than argument. And if every town has one of these, then the residents will start saying, why doesn't the rest of it look like this?
I was just going to add as well, I mentioned that I was really fortunate to look after 1,700 acre public green space in Peterborough. And we literally went through a process whereby we talked, just like Heather said as her key message. It was a matter of talking to lots of different people. And we actually deliberately spoke to people in Peterborough who we thought they might not like long grass. So who are those? Whether or not they were dog walkers, whether or not they were people already known to us as residents who did like everything to be tidy. And through that process of various community consultation, we actually kind of designated all of that 1,700 acres in 3 categories, and then the land management linked to that. And I think the other thing which we found as well was also you're never going to win everyone over. So it was massively about managing expectations. But at least the fact that we had spoken to lots of people, we actually had done it as a very open, consultative and engaging process that then people could be signed up to. So then even when did people come to us and say, we don't like it because it's too messy, we go, well, we're really sorry, but we're piloting this. And I think that's the other thing. We've really found the power of pilots. If you say you're piloting it for a few years, we're reviewing it, we'll see what happens, people often kind of go, oh, that's okay, it's not a definite, maybe they'll drop it. And then quite often we didn't hear from them again. So that was certainly my practical experience on the sharp end of it.
2 quick things. One is that we are, as a species, it seems, predisposed to only make a comment when we've got something unpleasant to say. And if more people, when they liked something, said to their local councillor, I'm just contacting you to let you know that we think this is great, honestly, that would make a difference. I don't know how many councillors we've got in the room, but councillors really do respond, and we should, Ben, be focusing on serving the majority, but councillors respond to the people who give them a ring. And if more people just said, do you know what, we think this is great, thanks for showing that leadership for nature, well done. Then next time somebody else rings up and says this isn't great, the member or the officers are in a position to say, well, hang on, we've had 15 people this morning telling us they like it. So if you like something and it's nature friendly, tell people that you like it. The other thing is local authorities need to show some leadership. There's a global biodiversity crisis, and no is a complete sentence in the English language, and sometimes it's appropriate just to say that. This is what we're doing. We're not changing our path on this. We have a lot of people who've come to our local councillor and told us they like it. So this is the leadership we're showing for nature. And more councils did that, we'd all be a lot better off.
And I'm thinking about kind of ownership of these things. So often if you can kind of get a sect of that community engaged around this who really like this and take some pride and ownership in it, I think that's where the message will start to establish itself. And it's also, I think, thinking about some of the age demographic as well, so potentially kind of aligned with what Chris is just saying, thinking about potentially some of the age demographic often of people that will often be very vociferous to councillors, very vociferous, perhaps a stronger option around voting, but actually potentially engaging some of the kind of younger people, particularly some of the people like Heather was talking about who are at that stage, you've got the ability to inspire them, and they potentially don't have this sort of nature blindness and shifting baseline syndrome already established. And if you can inspire them and get them interested, I think, and through their parents, through their school, that's got to be a way to kind of counter this sort of obsessive tidying garden culture that we've got in the UK. I think it's a British disease. I mean, we say we're a garden nation, we are, and I'm one of the biggest advocates for gardening in my other life, but this tidiness obsession is nuts and really needs to be challenged.
I think everybody said it really, but since we've moved into the Ousburn Valley, we noticed that management of the urban green spaces was getting a little bit heavy, and it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It's because volunteers wanted to be out there doing things, and they wanted to do practical things, cutting and mowing and all these things. So we spoke with the trust there who were writing a management plan at the time, a 10-year management plan, and we're integrating like a seasonal wildlife calendar within that management plan, working with the urban farm there as well, so that it respects nature and it actually enhances nature, whatever they're doing there, and finding other things that the volunteers can do, like surveying breeding birds and insects and setting up like an eye record or an eye naturalist for the area. So getting people again to celebrate nature and say that it's because of these amazing messy places, come and look at it. And we host free wildlife walks for the environment group there as well, so that they can come and see it for themselves and learn about it. So it's just getting people out to see what they'll lose if they do keep tidying up, I guess.
I think the local authority have to take a lead here, or local authorities have to take a lead here. We've got no control over what goes on in people's gardens, and people's gardens are becoming increasingly sanitised, particularly with plastic grass. I mean, whose idea? Whoever thought that was a good idea, plastic grass? But it's an enormous industry. There's a huge barn going up on the edge of Belford, and they produce all these plastic plants. And plastic hedges now as well in the estate where we live. Dreadful. We've got no control over what goes on in people's gardens, but the local authority have got control over the public realm. And I think that, as Chris said, the local authority need to take a lead there and demonstrate what can be done. In my village, there's over 5 hectares of close mown grass that isn't used for anything. Nobody plays football on it, the kids don't play on it, nobody walks on it, people walk along the paths. It's just mown for tidiness sake. And I polled the local community on Facebook, and it was absolutely polarised, the views between, no, leave it as it is, it's tidy, it's nice, to the other half saying, yes, we need to do something with this. We need wildflowers, we need a community orchard, we need trees. But split 50-50 and absolutely polarised. No, that might be quite nice. It was really vociferous. So I think getting people on board and taking some direct action, I think that's the way ahead.
Well, thank you for those answers. That was very comprehensive. Next question, please.
Thank you. Listening to most of the talks today, there's a backdrop of connection, and Miles Richardson down in the University of Derby has been doing a lot of research on connection with nature. It's been very interesting. He's discovered, or other people have discovered with him, that the stronger your connection with nature, the more likely you are to protect it. So my very general question to the panel is, one of the main effective vectors of that connection was a detailed look at nature, not just a cursory look. So my general question is, at a practical level from the panel is, have you got any good ideas about how to engage people when they come into the countryside to look at nature in a detailed level and on a sensory level?
Yeah.
I think I could go on and on, to be honest. I don't even know where to begin. It depends where they are, and making sure that whatever you do is applicable to various audiences who might speak different languages and have different access requirements and things like that. But I suppose that's at the core of what we try and do. So we try and sneak up on nature and eavesdrop on it and give people this like magical, enchanting experience that they couldn't possibly imagine themselves, and essentially try and show that you can go out into nature instead of going to the cinema. It's just as exciting. And I mean, our Dawn Chorus discos, for example, you've got your wireless headphones that light up, which is really cool. And then we have a parabolic dish so that you can hone in on bird song during the Dawn Chorus, and it just brings that extra dimension to people. So you can listen to the majesty of the Dawn Chorus, but then if you hone in on a robin or whatever it is, you can go through that particular songster with who you're leading around. And I could honestly go on and on, but I think the most simple thing is just making sure that you get the people out in the first place and showing them the bits that they might consider to be boring, and not necessarily in the countryside, also in these amazing urban places, because a lot of us are moving more and more to these urban places now. It's estimated, I think, 95% of the population or something in the next 10 years are meant to be in urban spots. So it's really important that we keep those places as well as the countryside wild.
Yeah, I think looking for nature at home is a really good place to start as well. And it kind of gets away from a bit of this snobbery of you've got to go to a nature reserve or something like that to see nature. I think some of the best connections to nature early on in many children's and people's lives is stuff on their doorstep. And I mean, things like the sort of Big Garden Birdwatch that we run at RSPB every year grows year on year. I mean, yeah, we've just been through a kind of global pandemic. I think if I was looking for positives in what's come out of the global pandemic is during those lockdowns, more and more people discovered nature on their doorstep because they weren't able to go to the metro centre or they weren't able to go off abroad. They actually had to go and do their hour's walk from home, and people start to notice stuff and start to notice nature, and probably in those scruffy bits and not those neatly manicured bits. And I think that's really important, is just encouraging people to get out there and just look at what's around them, or then taking the next step and be wowed at a spectacle like the Farns or somewhere like that. But yeah, just get out and look at the simple things.
Just a quick one. I mean, up and down the country in all the AONBs, all the teams are doing some pretty amazing things with connecting people with nature on an absolute shoestring. So if we believe in it as a society, we really need to invest in it for a start. But I've always thought that first-hand experience is what really matters. A frog in the pond is worth 5 in formaldehyde, as they not very catchily say. And if you can get people out with stuff in their hand, people are switched on to that. As small children, it's relatively easy. We all do loads of work with small children. They go away fascinated. Hopefully they tell their parents. We sometimes lose them a little bit in their teenage years. And how the trick of hanging on to those kids, I think, is one we still need to crack better. But plenty of adults don't know a horse from a hornbeam. And if we can get them outside too and actually physically experiencing nature, because if you don't experience it in a way that's fun, if you don't enjoy it, why should you care about it? So if people can't experience it and enjoy it, they're never going to protect it when there's a need to. But hanging on to those kids in their middle years is tricky.
I was so pleased that you mentioned Miles Richardson. And if you haven't discovered his work, I was chatting to a lady in the break, and he's really inspiring because he's bust through that myth that it's all about knowledge. So if you're interested in following that up, just Google the Nature Connection Handbook. It's been completely embraced by the National Trust, and it's really, really effective. The Young North East Naturalist project that I mentioned in my presentation, just as we were launching that project, we discovered Miles Richardson's work, and we had to just very quickly adapt it. And we were so pleased we did, because what we found out was by taking that approach of it's all about the experience, make it immersive, create memories, make it a real great experience, it worked for every single child out of those 200 children in the project. But I think one thing that we found, which was such a simple way, was literally just taking children outside and we gave them a very cheap, plain notebook. And we encouraged them to actually create a kind of nature journal. And again, this linked nicely to the research of whether or not anyone was dyslexic, or if they wanted to write lots of names that they could, if they wanted to do a sketch. So again, it worked for children. But the concept of them having their own nature notebook that they could take away, and we encouraged them to just have a page a day and to write in it. And that is habit forming. And that's far more likely to kind of have an effect, hopefully, and kind of be a little bit life-changing. So I must admit, for the kind of price of a 20 or 30p notebook, we found that the feedback from that was really, really positive. So in case that helps. But I fully recommend Miles's work, so thank you so much for mentioning him.
One of the things, especially in the post-industrial parts of Britain, is we forget that often the countryside is you're considerably more empty of wildlife than the brownfield fringe, which people in urban areas, whether that's Manchester or indeed many areas of Durham and this part of the world, can benefit from, because those are often the only remaining areas of shrubland, of, willow tits, of bullfinches. They're the places we can easily put the beavers because they're not farmed. They're never going to be farmed. They're never going to. You are not going to be building on some of these places because of the subsidence issues. And in this part of the world in particular, there are extraordinary brownfield biospheres, as I call them, waiting to be properly designated and protected, where the wildlife is extraordinary, where the birdsong is much louder than the classic perceived countryside of pea green fields that can be stunningly silent these days after a century of agricultural over-intensification, landscape simplification, which of course, me and many others are working with farms to reverse. So it doesn't necessarily need to be, of course, get kids out into the countryside, fresh air, up on the moors, fantastic. However, there are also these overlooked hidden gems, often beside our towns, that are even more biodiverse and need to be properly promoted, protected, and get children out into those, I think.
Just two quick points on the end of that. Sorry, Patrick. Just to come back on what Ben said, in the A1B, just to put into context, probably one of the most wildlife-rich sites we've got on the entire coast is Embleton Quarry. So it was a quarry first, then it was a landfill site, post-industrial, but now it's been managed as a nature reserve by a group of local people, and it is a little island. And Ben was talking to farmers this morning about scrub and the mosaic of scrub, and that's exactly what you've got there. You've got this mosaic of scrub, and it's amazing. And the local school are now using it. They have beach school every Friday. No matter what, they go down to the beach. But now they also go to the nature reserve, and they've got a pond dipping platform, and the kids can explore it. It's great, and I think that's really important. But to come back on what Chris said. At teenage years, and I did. I was in the school birdwatching club, and then drifted away in my teenage years and came back to this kind of stuff. But I think, yes, we want to wean children and kids and teenagers off their screens. But I think, technology has a role to play, and I think that's one way we might try to keep young people engaged with this. There's some amazing things now, apps available, cameras on phones. People can take photographs of wildlife and identify it immediately on an app, and they can keep lists of what they've seen and record what they've seen, and it actually contributes towards the biological record. And maybe when they're a bit older, there are new naturalists of the future, our new nature recorders, our journalists, our bloggers, whatever else they might be. So I think there is a role there. Despite wanting to get them away from technology, there's a role for technology there in encouraging that. I think Catherine wanted to say something, Patrick, at the back.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that question, really. I'm Catherine Williams, and I supported the ONB in developing the Coastlands project. And I just wanted to say that a lot of the Coastlands project was based, a lot of the ideas within Coastlands were based on Miles Richardson's research from the nature notebooks that we had, the getting the schools outside, lots and lots of activities around noticing nature, and that is being practiced in different sites across the northeast. The Wildlife Trust and Urban Green Newcastle are doing a partnership project called Beelines in the City, which has got a whole strand around noticing nature and looking at 3 good things in nature. So that was just one comment on that. In response to Chris's comment and Ian's comment about losing teenagers, I want to say, I don't think we should beat ourselves up about that. I've got a 15-year-old who has had quite a, as a child, he was outside a lot. We did all the nature things. We're quite a nature-based family. If you gave him a choice now, he will be on his computer. He will sit on the screen rather than go outside. But recently, I got him to fill in a local consultation response about Anakin Allenmouth, and he waxed lyrical about the spread. We shouldn't have spread of towns. We should protect our rural areas. We should protect the fringe of towns. And I thought, yes, it's worked. It's fine. It doesn't matter that he's on his screen because he gets it, and he'll grow up, and that will. That's who we need. We need, I don't think we need to think we want to take teenagers away from growing up. They've got a lot going on in their heads, and they've got a lot to manage when you're going through puberty. Maybe they, and arguably getting outdoors a bit might help them with that, but it doesn't mean they won't come back. So my actual question is around diversity, really, and how do we live in the most beautiful place in the country, I would argue. We know the pandemic has shown us that access to places like this aren't equitable. The people that access places like this tend to be, well, I always say this, they look like Ian. Ian's our classic.
Dave.
Yeah, there you are. Yeah.
And Dave.
Yeah. how do we get other people here? And in response to that, I often hear, we're not a very diverse community. We don't have a lot of very diverse ethnicity in these areas. And that is true. But we also know that people visit Northumberland from across the country. And the census results today have shown us that across the country we are getting more diverse. So how do we make sure, without increasing the number of visitors, that we're changing the demographic of visitors, and that people of all backgrounds, all ages, all financial situations feel welcome to come here?
It's a difficult one. We are the least ethnically diverse area, and particularly here on the coast. Not just ethnicity, but really is. It's 0.4%. We've got the lowest percentage of 16 to 24-year-olds in the country. We've got the highest rate of retired people, amongst the highest rate of retired people on the coast here. And that is difficult. It is, without having easy access to the countryside, it's a very difficult thing to do. So hopefully the work we're doing with this visitor transport strategy will help. So what we're looking at there is how easy it is to access the area if you haven't got a car. And it's not that easy at the moment. And, a lot of the people, looking at the population of South East Northumberland, people who traditionally visited the Northumberland coast and may no longer do so. You've been working in the Hurst area of Ashington, Catherine, recently. You'll know what it's like there. Those people maybe not have the opportunities to get out to the Northumberland coast, even, relatively close by like they used to. So how can we make it easier? And it's not that necessarily transport is an issue, and that's something we're trying to work on, but then it's the access to information, and it's knowing how to get out from those communities to the Northumberland coast. There's a direct bus from Hurst to Alnmouth, but how many people in Hurst know that bus is there? And then can they afford it? The BSIP, the Bus Improvement Grant, will help because it's going to have maximum fares for the day, and it's going to introduce things like family fares. So a family can jump on the bus for a tenner from Ashington and go to Alnmouth or Warkworth for the day. But then to break down those other barriers, those perceived barriers, how do they get there? What information do they need? Is it the right place for them? What do they do when they get there? What is that to do for the kids? Those are the questions that I think we have a responsibility to answer. And equally, that could be from communities in the West End of Newcastle, making more of Alnmouth Station. But when you get to Alnmouth Station, what do you do? There's absolutely nothing that tells you you're even near an area of outstanding natural beauty. How do you get to the coast? You can't see the coast from there. How do you get to the coast, and what do you do when you get there? So it's providing that kind of information, I think, is a real challenge for us. But we have to get the nuts and bolts, the practicalities right of making a place accessible with a capital A.
I think it's a great question. In the North Pennines, we've been running a project for the last 12 months called A Landscape for Everyone, where we've been going out into some of the communities around the North Pennines and just trying to find out what the barriers are to people actually coming out and engaging with and enjoying the countryside. So in some cases, it's because people can't see anybody else that looks like them. But in some cases, it's actually been they're so busy, focused on some of their everyday things, everyday concerns in some communities, that actually this isn't the thing they think of first. And the last thing they want is someone coming along and saying, oh, you should come out and do this. Well, actually get to know us first. So one of the things we're going to do is allow some staff time for people to go and volunteer in some of those organisations to build up a relationship with those people before they start saying, why don't you come out and enjoy the North Pennines? We'll put this and that on for you. Well, you have to get a deeper relationship with folk first. So there's that need as well to have the time and the energy to, there's that phrase, no talking about us without us. So we have to engage with those communities and just listen to what it is they want. And if the first thing they want isn't to come to the coast of the North Pennines, how can we help them find the things that they do want first and build up that relationship? We did a stargazing session with a WI in Weardale and a Muslim women's group from Newcastle. And the Muslim women's group came out and did stargazing with the WI, and the WI went back to the mosque. And they're now kind of doing stuff together. Sometimes we just have to provide that catalyst to say, we can help you do this if you're interested. And start it off and then step back. But it needs resourcing, and it's all about individual people listening to those other folk, and don't expect it to happen overnight. We often focus very strongly on ethnicity. I'm not sure we focus very much on people with different sexuality, and people can actually feel quite pressured being their natural self in a space that they're not used to. And we don't talk much about class. And I think class is still one of the biggest, class is still one of the biggest barriers to engaging with anything in this country. So as much opportunities we can provide, as much listening as we can do to give people what it is they want. And the first thing they want might not be this, and we just have to work it slowly.
Yeah, I think diversity comes in many forms, and income diversity particularly. I've been in two sectors that have been embarrassingly undiverse when it comes to income backgrounds. And when we put out the advert for my nature restoration manager at Real Wild Estates, I said, I know what it's going to be. It's going to be predominantly male, public school, white, and I slightly hoped I was wrong. Unfortunately, I wasn't wrong. And there are two things here. Organisations like mine need to be shifting that public school white landowner bias, land manager, site manager bias. Not because I'm comprehensive in Oxford, so I can't really talk, can I? But I think the point is, we don't just want other people who think in the way we do. I think thought diversity is incredibly important, whoever those thoughts belong to. But it is striking that the pursuit and management of land in particular, and for nature, does appear to be very much sort of middle class and upwards if we're talking about the class side of things. So how do we deal with that problem? Well, the first question I ask myself is, when did this problem arise? Did it arise when we put out the application, or are we talking with a problem that's developed over the previous 20 years of schooling and of opportunity and of inequality of opportunity? The access of a school with a large budget to send their kids on a ski trip to France where they see more wildlife, or even I know some schools even send kids on sort of an African safari trip. I mean, it's completely incomparable to the budget of a inner city comprehensive school. And is there not a role for government here, perhaps, in evening out some of this, levelling up, so to speak, so that more people from an early age of lower income backgrounds, not only different ethnicities, have more access to nature, so they are catching up with the more privileged people like myself. And then I think in 20 years' time, we may not be having this conversation, but I think it starts early. I think it starts in schools. And I think we have to level up the access to nature from an income point of view, and I think there's probably a role for government in that as well as the private sector.
Absolutely.
Right, I'm going to have to draw the Q&A session to a close there. So thank you for your questions. I'm sorry we just haven't got time to fit everybody in, but if you want to come and have a chat after the session's ended, then you're more than welcome to do so, and we'll try and answer your questions. So thank you to the panel for their insight and their expertise, and thank you to you for your questions. And we're now going to introduce Chris Woodley-Stewart, who is the director of the North Pennines AONB, who's going to reflect on our conference, on our forum, and look at nature recovery. I'll just also add that Chris is the Vice Chair of the National Association of AONB. So, Chris, over to you.
So there will be time for some 2 or 3 questions after Chris's presentation as well. So,
thanks very much. My name is Chris Woodley-Stewart. Don't be confused by my posh surname. It's my name and my wife's name put together when we got married. My mother said, "Don't worry, love, folk will know you're not posh." Such a double-edged comment, but I'm really pleased to be able to come and talk to you today. Ian asked me to, rather than talk about the national work, Ian asked me to come along and talk about nature recovery and try and get you leaving with the sense that we can still do something about it. So I don't know how successful I'll be in that, but I'll certainly have a go. But just to touch on the work the National Association does, I'm Vice Chair as well as being Director of the North Pennines AONB Partnership. We have a really good, very small team of staff that punches well above its weight. We are in all the rooms that you'd hope we were in at DEFRA and Natural England and elsewhere, batting hard for AONBs. We were very much involved in trying to shape the government's response to the Glover Review. What we're really looking for is renewed purposes, duties, powers, and crucially resources to enable us We already punch a long way above our weight, but just to enable us to punch that little bit harder. What we're not trying to be is like the national parks. We don't want to be national parks light. There's nothing wrong with the national parks, but we've set out to government a prospectus for AONBs being the forward-thinking, fleet-of-foot, 21st century designation that we can be, that doesn't need 10 or 12 million pounds worth of core funding, but does need enough to keep the wolf from the door, because we will carry forward that agenda of convene and enable and deliver. And we've got a fantastic track record of it. So what ministers need, many of you will probably work with ministers, but what ministers don't like is to bring them a problem or to bring us something and say, oh, I've broken it, can you fix it? What they really like is, I've got a solution that you're crying out for because you don't have many solutions and you're new and you don't know your civil servants yet. So the prospectus that we've got is just landing at the right time, I think. So, Ian, is there any possibility of a glass of water, please? I'm sorry. So I'm going to say I wouldn't start from here, and I wouldn't if I was trying to have nature recovery. I'd like to start from a much higher base than we're at, but that's where we are. So is it too late to turn back the decline of nature? So, talking about class, when I was a kid, I grew up on a housing estate in Leeds, and that arrow points to my house. It was the next door one in these maisonettes. And there was a wood along the back, as you can see, but we never went in there because it was scary as hell. And I was very young, and my parents didn't go in there because it was full of big kids doing dangerous things. Probably just having a laugh, really, but at the time. And when I was 5, we moved to that house there. This photograph taken from the towering block of flats that when I was really little seemed just immense. And that was before the front of those houses all greened up. The big green bit at the back is my school grounds, so it was a desert, and that's a disservice to deserts, really. There was, there's very little in some of these landscapes. So we saw house sparrows and we saw gulls and we saw the odd magpie and the occasional crow. But there seemed to be insects everywhere, though. And in summer, you'll remember them spattering the front of every car in the country. You couldn't go anywhere without that happening. And there was waste ground, touching on what Ben was saying. I can't see Ben. Maybe he's gone. He's on the phone. There was waste ground everywhere. And we kind of spill out over it, having adventures of all kinds, so it seemed. And I didn't have much contact with nature other than that, but I really loved it. And now, all those bits of waste ground, they've been wasted. I know people need places to live. We need to be much more sensible and clever about where we build them. The little yellow triangle is my house. The little green one at the bottom is my grandma's. And the area etched in red was our shrubland. That was the tip, we called it. That was the waste ground, full of long grass and scrub and birds and insects. Long ago, that got turned into what you see there. And so when I moved to a not-so-scenic dual carriageway at the age of 10, we didn't see much either. So I'm not quite sure where I got my love of nature from. But that was the mid-70s. And I think we'd all agree there was more wildlife around then than there is now. Would we? Yeah. Excellent. Good start. I'll talk more about shifting baselines later. But there was a lot more species diversity and abundance than there is now. But the rot had set in a long time before that. And so here we are today at a time when we know more about nature than we have ever known before, yet we are more disconnected from it than we have ever been. We are far more disconnected from it than we've ever been, but yet we know such a lot about ecology, about how nature works and how we might fix the problems that we've got. And we've forgotten how much our lives depend on it, how much we depend on it for our physical and spiritual health and well-being, for the food that we eat, the air that we breathe, and the water that we drink. There isn't an alternative. This is what we've got. So the amount we've lost is pretty astronomical, and it's not stuff you've never heard of. We've lost 60% of our swifts in the last 30-odd years. When I moved into my current house 20 years ago, there were 30 swifts flying around the street around my house. Last year, there were 4, and I've watched that decline over the years with great sadness. And next year, we may have none at all. 34% of our swallows have been lost in my lifetime.
And what do swifts and swallows eat? Of course they do. And we've lost such a phenomenal amount of our insect life. Now, I am going to hopefully send you away happy here, but I'm going to have to take you down before I lift you up again. I'm sorry, it's the rules. So 95 out of every hedgehog, 100 hedgehogs have disappeared in the lifetime of anybody in this room. 95%. 98% of turtle doves. I'm really hoping there's a turtle dove behind me. Is that right? Excellent, because I can't see my slides. Water voles, ratty from Wind in the Willows, 97% decline, one of our most loved species. That's not a number, that's a catastrophe. So let's pretend there's 100 of you here. We're not far off. Can you all put your hand up, please? Just one hand. Everybody apart from Patrick, Heather, and David, take your hands down. That's what 97% decline looks like. We bandy numbers about, but that's catastrophic. So 29% of the birds in this country are on our red list of species of conservation concern. And they're not just, again, things you've never heard of. They're house sparrows. The starling is on that list. We're losing things that we absolutely take for granted. So the change is real, although someone tried to tell me the other night that I didn't know what I was talking about and there was loads of wildlife, just as much as there'd ever been, and I didn't know where to look. Well, if only that was true, but there are pockets of diversity everywhere, but that's all they are. They are just pockets. Equally, somebody in a biodiversity action planning meeting 20 years ago in Oxfordshire said this: Woodcock aren't rare, we shot 6 at the weekend. Well, they're 6 rarer than they were before. Now, I've got nothing particularly against shooting, but the idea that, woodcock is a massively declining species. Even 20 years ago, it was massively declining. It's even more so now. It seems perverse that we can still shoot woodcock. So, talking in baselines like we were earlier, now this is what got somebody to walk out of one of my talks the other night, so listen very carefully and don't get cross yet. I mean, I will annoy one of you at some stage. It's fine, I don't mind. So this is not a comment about gamekeeping in early Victorian Scotland. What this is, and I'd really like to walk... Can I have that microphone? Thank you. So what this is a comment on, this is gamekeeper kills from the Glengarry estate in Scotland in the late 1830s. Have a little look at some of these numbers. 63 goshawks, 198 wildcats, 275 red kites, 63 hen harriers. These are amazing numbers. This isn't all about being killed. It's about what an enormous ecological network there must have been on that estate sitting underneath that network of predators to sustain that much wildlife. And it's a landscape partly created by stalking and shooting. But the ecological network underneath that must have been vast to sustain that many predators, and they're just the ones that got killed. That's when someone walked out the other night because he thought I was having a go at gamekeepers. Actually, perversely, in this case, quite the opposite. So the numbers are staggering, and there are relatively few generalist predators on this list as well. It was a really, really rich ecosystem. And they weren't all buying a takeaway. They were all eating something. A huge web of life under that. Now try finding that now. Try finding that many predators to kill now, you'd have no chance. Because the ecological conditions to support them are not there. People don't like change, but they do. Boy, they like tidiness. And I know we've discussed this quite a bit today. But nature doesn't like tidiness, and we build things in the wrong places. We manicure and spray every verge. We cut every verge and every hedge. I had a parish councillor say to me a few years ago, when we talked about a roadside verge conservation programme, "We've got enough wildflowers, thank you very much." And I quote, "No, you haven't. You really, really haven't. I assure you that you haven't." And that's the attitude we face, and we absolutely have to overcome it. And it takes leadership, like I was talking about before, from our local authorities in particular. And it takes you to speak out when you see something you like. You've got a really strong role in this. You've got a lot of agency in this. So we won't notice all these things slipping away. They'll go out with a whimper, they'll vanish, and we'll look up and we'll think, God, where did all the swifts go? And we're trying But despite some sterling efforts, we're all failing. When my daughter, who is now 23, was really small, I said, "What do you think Daddy does at work?" And she had a little think, and she said, "Shopping and dancing." I wish. When she was a little bit older, I said, "What do you think Daddy..." Well, the dancing, not the shopping. "What do you think Daddy does at work?" And she said, "Daddy saves the wild." I thought, well, I'll take that, but actually Daddy doesn't. Daddy's failing to save the wild, along with all his friends that he works with and all the farmers and land managers and others. We're failing, but we are trying. But we're failing partly because the political will to reverse the declines in nature just hasn't been there. So there's a failure globally, nationally and regionally, and a lack of leadership on an absolutely epic scale. And unless we grasp that, we're not going to turn things around. So the excuses are deeply ingrained in society, especially there isn't the money. Well, this is the 6th largest economy in the world, we're always told, but it's also arguably the most nature-depleted island in the world, and those two things don't stack up for me. So it might come as a shock, and it did to me, but the tax breaks given in May 2022 by the chap who's now our Prime Minister, who was at the time the Chancellor, are approximately £3 billion a year given back to the oil and gas industry, for which government could have insulated 2 million homes or funded all of the AONBs in this country for the next 500 years. So when people look down their nose at people on benefits, remember, big oil's on benefits. And the poorest taxpayer you know is paying for that so that they and their suppliers can freeze you and squeeze you in your homes. Sorry, we're filming this, aren't we? I'm in trouble now. So here are some of the other things we spend money on.
I love this one. The post-COVID kickstart production of TV programmes including Pointless and Midsummer Murders. You could have funded all the AONBs for 83 years. £500 million. Eat out to help out. Spread COVID. Oh, I'm having trouble again. 141 years of AONB funding. I never know what's coming next. HS2, 17,833 years of AONB funding. HS2 might bring some benefits, not sure yet. We need to get more people on the rail, that's for sure. The planning of the Garden Bridge. For the planning of the Garden Bridge, you could have planted a forest the size of Liverpool. If you wanted a garden, that kind of feels a little bit more like one. A bridge we didn't even build, incidentally. So, the money is there, but we lack the leadership and the vision and some of the tools, so we'll have to take those things into our own hands, you and me, and lead ourselves, to have the vision and forge some of those tools as best we can. So in the AONB network, we punch well above our weight, and I'll illustrate that in a minute. This slide illustrates the comparative DEFRA funding, though, between AONBs and national parks. I like national parks. I think they should have more money. But there's the Northumberland coast, this little red star at the end there. That's how much you get. This looks like a science fiction film where you come across the desert to this enormous citadel that gleams over here. And in this gleaming citadel, you will see the South Downs National Park Authority. They do great work. The South Downs National Park Authority gets twice as much DEFRA funding as all 34 English AONBs put together. Ooh, you gasped. There's some gasps. That's always good. I like a gasp. The North Pennines, we've got a big team. There are 60 people in my team. Our funding is probably 3 or 4 times the size of the Northumberland coasts, but it's 10 times smaller than that of the Northumberland National Park Authority. We're just good at going out and finding money and having ideas. So we're all punching above our weight in the AONB network. We don't want to take money from the national parks. We don't want to be like the national parks. But something in that there has to change. Surely, doesn't it? So the budget of the entire AONB network is about the same as one medium-sized secondary school. I like secondary schools a lot, believe me. But the budget of one medium-sized secondary school is about what all 34 AONBs get from DEFRA. I knew I'd go on a rant and kind of lose my place in this little talk. So coming back to the loss of nature and stopping me ranting and getting into trouble about stuff. Oh, there's more. This is why Ian asked me to do this. We've known each other a long time. So coming back to the loss of nature and the need to reverse it, if all we do is talk about the horror,
then how is anybody expected to work up some enthusiasm to do something about it? Because if you have no hope, then there is none. And it also leads to people saying, well, it's knackered anyway, so why not do this or that damaging thing? But if you had a blood stain on your carpet, I'll leave it to you to decide how it got there. You wouldn't put a wine stain on it as well, would you? You'd try and get the blood stain up. You wouldn't make it, you wouldn't just think, oh, I give up. Providing it's salvageable, you'd salvage it. Well, nature's still salvageable. We can sort this out. You're all thinking about how your blood stain got onto your carpet, aren't you? I know. So from what can we generate some hope? What are our reasons to be cheerful? As the great Ian Dury once said. So I'm going to show you some reasons to be cheerful. So this is High Helbeck. It's a shooting estate near Brough. And our work there, it's an 1,100 hectare shooting estate. We've been working to transform the landscape for nature and people. We've built a fantastic partnership with the RSPB and the Woodland Trust and Natural England. And adding that to the ambition and curiosity of the landowner, we've been able to restore 80 hectares of peatland, plant 50,000 trees, often in these, promote natural regeneration, and generate new species data, put in 25 new wader scrapes, thanks to Janet, who's over there, run a host of nature-friendly events for the community, plenty of tree planting, all sorts of nature-friendly events for the community, get them involved in their local estate, as well as bringing other landowners and managers there to see what can be done whilst without removing shooting altogether. They've lessened their gamekeeping, but there's 157 hectares of new either planted woodland or areas set aside for natural regeneration or assisted regeneration, loads of heathland restoration, all these wader scrapes, and they're still able to shoot on that land. These are the kinds of people that give us hope. Well, that was meant to be the forest, meant to be Dorset, but never mind. In the Forest of Bowland this year, there have been more breeding hen harriers than there have been for the last 30 years. 50 young raised from 16 nesting attempts. Of course, now let's see how they survive. They're not out of the woods yet. An appropriate phrase for hen harriers. They don't go in the woods, but you know what I mean. Now, it's the first time in 10 years that the SPA citation level of 12 breeding pairs has been reached for that area. And the AONB manager, Elliot Lorimer, told me that this year, rather than having to scour the landscape for a brief glimpse of these magical birds, it's been a delight to just randomly encounter them whilst out and about in the area. Let me go back to Dorset, because honestly, it's worth it. Purbeck Super NNNR, Super National Nature Reserves, have more than 3,000 hectares given over to nature, including one single grazing unit that's 1,300 hectares. And it's got ponies and cattle and pigs alongside the local sika herd. They're talking about reintroducing bison. There's a wild beaver, unfenced beaver reintroduction program as well. There are ospreys and white-tailed eagles, and the Knepp storks fly overhead. And my friend Tom, the Dorset AONB manager, described this summer as feeling at times like being in East Africa, a huge landscape with big roving herds of bovids kicking up dust, wading in mires with the attendant birds. And meanwhile, the pigs are turning over bracken-rich areas, providing bare ground habitat for beetles and ground nesting wasps. You know, this is big stuff. We don't hear about this. We hear about the decline of things. This is all kind of going on now. Any of you that were familiar with the Durham coast before, well, in the last century, will have known it as a really unbelievably degraded landscape. But it's a massive success story, this, about transforming that landscape. 12 miles of restored coastline, large areas managed for nature, and it looks unbelievably different. In the southwest and the southeast protected landscapes, they're building a chalk grassland nature recovery network from Dorchester to Dorset. They've got years of expertise. They know just how to deliver at really big scale, and they will pull this off. And it'll involve very close collaboration with farmers and land managers that they're already really, really good at. The nature recovery lead in the Cotswolds, Simon Smith, told me that he was actually a bit jealous of the next generation of conservationists because we've been holding the line. We've been fighting the decline of things. Simon thinks that through things like this, the next generation of nature conservationists will be actually making great strides for nature recovery. So when they say to their kids, what does mummy or daddy do at work? And they say saving the wild, they'll be right. Coming back to the North Pennines where I work and thinking about scale, over the last 17 years, our team has directly led the restoration of 44,000 hectares of peatland. That's 3.5 times the size of Newcastle. That's like taking 7,000 cars off the road in carbon terms, or the carbon emissions of 1 million UK homes. And it's also tremendously important for biodiversity. And as well as that, it's important for the historic record, it's important for flood risk management, water colour, sediment load and more. There's a great bog body on there. I've always wanted to find a bog body and I've got loads of candidates. So this really is large-scale, cost-effective work where you can really see the results really, really quickly. But what's really exciting about peatland restoration in the north is like the big chalk in the south, but a bit further down the road, is our Great North Bog Coalition. We call it the Great North Bog because there's a Great North Forest, and we also thought, people like Great North Bog. Boris Johnson thought it was funny, and he kind of would, I guess. But through that coalition, the North 6 Upland Peatland Partnerships and all our teams are collaborating to restore the remaining degraded upland peat in the north of England. Now, it's going to cost around 200 million over 20 years. Together, we've already raised and invested in those landscapes over 100 million for all the multiple benefits it brings and restored over 100,000 hectares. But it was only when we came together to develop this concept at such a big scale that major funders, especially the private and philanthropic sector, started to become really interested in what we were doing. It's when we were talking about 200 million and not 2 million that people began to take it seriously. And that's how we need to think in the nature sector. I don't want the crumbs that drop off somebody else's table. I want my own loaf. And we deserve it, and nature deserves it. Now, that money is out there because, in financial terms, I probably went the wrong way then. It's what I like to call a Neymar. £200 million is what Paris Saint-Germain paid for this chap, a preening show pony, incidentally, to be running about playing football. Now, I love football. I can't love it that much because I've got a season ticket at Leeds. But I don't begrudge that this has been about football. What this proves is, though, this kind of money is out there in society if we can only target it in the places that really, really need it. And it's not a lot of money, in governmental terms. We've seen how much something like Eat Out to Help Out cost 2.5 times what we're talking about to fix all the remaining peatland in the north. This is about will and about leadership, and it's nothing else. It's just those things. And if we can crack those things, we're away. So it's in our hands to solve this, but our hands have to be untied first. We can do some of that ourselves, and a lot of it comes down to belief. But to really make the massive changes we need to make, there has to be a light bulb moment for government that switches on to the need to restore nature on an enormous, unprecedented scale as an unapologetic priority. We should stop feeling like we're, oh, well, if you don't mind, or, oh, This is important. This is vital. This is the only place that we have to live. And it's in desperate need of being rescued, for want of a better phrase. So we should be unapologetic about it. And we need to get past the pathetic prevarication and the ridiculous reasons for not doing things. There'll always be a reason not to do something. And we just have to grasp the urgency and get on with it. So we need to conserve and enhance and restore and connect habitats on a massive scale, the biggest scale that we can. And you've seen some inspiring examples from AONBs, I hope, that allow for that without a 21st century version of the Highland clearances. We're not trying to sweep people off their land here. We are so far past conservation. We're just holding the line. We've got to conserve what we have and build out from there into the wider landscape, conserve what we have, recover what we've lost, and make things better than they were before. And we talked about engagement before. We need to connect people with nature like never before. We talk a lot about engagement and hard-to-reach groups. There are no hard-to-reach groups. They're just groups we're rubbish at reaching. It's not their fault, it's ours. It's the same with visitors. There are no problem visitors. There's just problem behaviour that we need the investment in addressing. And we've been guilty of doing things to people and not with them. But that mantra, as I said before, about no talking about us without us, applies to everybody we work with. And it's essential because, as we were saying before, experiencing nature is the gateway to caring about it. And caring is the platform on which we will build the decision-making that gives nature a chance to fight back. Conservation begins with care, and it begins with fun, and it begins with the stories that we tell each other about nature. Not about stats, but about how special and wonderful it is. That's the things it begins with. And that's where we generate our wonder and excitement from. And to provide the opportunity for experiencing nature in your own hands, with your own eyes, especially close to home. I like to make sure it's the slide I'm thinking it is. Paul's amazingly photogenic. Paul's a farmer in Upper Teesdale. We have to invest in farmers and land managers and incentivise them to manage land in the most nature-friendly way possible, alongside food production. I'm a pretty big fan of eating, and I'm sure you all are too. And we shouldn't, we've got to really take into account that we have to do these things together. It's not one thing or the other. We can have both. But a nature-rich future without farming and farmers is a dangerous fallacy. What are we going to eat? They're a huge part of the solution. So the financial support system that helps farmers to deliver for nature has to work for them. It has to be economically viable, and for wildlife and habitats. And as Ian was alluding to before, it's a complex picture. Our international trade in foodstuffs has to function properly too. Nothing happens in isolation. Everywhere in towns and cities, as well as in the wider landscape, we need to make wiser planning decisions. The planning system has to have a more robust approach to protecting and enhancing nature. The mitigation hierarchy still has to matter. Just because there's a nice biodiversity net gain scheme coming along, it doesn't mean you can't occasionally say no. Politely. But no, as I said before, is a complete sentence in the English language, and sometimes it's the most appropriate one. I'm sorry, that's not a very fashionable thing to say. We're supposed to say, oh yeah, of course you can have any development you like, anywhere you want, as long as you do some green stuff. Sometimes it's just no. So I worry as well about things like the biodiversity net gain metric. It could be great, but there can't be any snake oil in it. It can't be something that we use to cover up terrible planning decisions and building stuff in the wrong place. It has to deliver genuine long-term benefits that get long-term investment, or all we're doing is shifting the deck chairs on the Titanic again. Public bodies and businesses need to manage their own estate for nature as best they can. They need to understand that their supply chain isn't just about labels and boxes, but it's about clean air and clean water and pollinating insects. They're all the things that make their supply chain work. Conservation agencies, notably Natural England. Anybody from Natural England here? Hello. We think you do a marvellous job. We think you're massively under-resourced. A few years ago, at a dinner, I was asked by the then, and I don't care if I get into trouble, catastrophically awful former chair of Natural England, an investment banker by trade, what I thought of Natural England, so I made the terrible mistake of telling him. Don't ask a Yorkshireman what he thinks unless you want the answer. And what I said was, really good people in a failing organisation. And at the time it was true, and I think it's in much better health now under Jenny Juniper and Marion Spain are providing fantastic leadership, and at least it's had some additional resources. But it still needs a lot more investment and a lot more clout. And clout just takes a policy shift. It doesn't take money. I hope there's a squirrel behind me. There is a squirrel behind me. So there's no getting away from the fact that there is a global, national and local ecological emergency, at least as profound as and partly linked to the climate crisis. Is there? You're all with me on this, I hope. But there is some hope.
So were this a football match, and I apologise to Paul Jackson over there and Ian, who's heard me say this a million times, were this a football match, nature would be 5-0 down. But without Ian and the RSPB and all you that volunteer and all the organisations you work in and everybody who makes nature-friendly decisions, without all these bodies, without nature-friendly farmers and land managers, it'd be 10-0. The good news is, although it's past half-time, we can still come out and turn this around. Things look bleak. If we can get our young substitutes on and replace us old farts, then we have a future. But we can turn it around, and we can and we must win.
And the victory starts with belief. That's all I'm asking you to do. That's all we have to do to start with. Belief that the shackles of state-facilitated short-sightedness and greed can be shaken off, and that local, regional and national politicians will get the idea that this planet is, put simply, dying on our watch. Belief that people can be inspired to act, to believe that you can be the change that you want to see in society, and that you can and you will make a difference. So ask yourself, how would you like your efforts for nature to be remembered? And what will your personal legacy be? Who will you inspire? How will you live the change that you know is needed? And then, quite simply, take that action in any way that you can, because it is in your hands right here on the Northumberland coast, one of the most beautiful places still, in this still beautiful country, in this our one beautiful world. Because if we really believe it and we act together now, and you've seen the examples of it working, we can become unstoppable and anything is possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and lovely to hear you talk again. Yeah, inspiring stuff and insightful stuff as well. I'm sure you'll agree, and gives you a greater understanding of what's happening out there. So we do have time for a few more questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, I know you had a question. If you grab a microphone, yeah. And we'll see.
It's a slightly out of time question. It was intended for the panel a moment or two ago. I'm Mick McCarthy. I'm a local tour guide, a volunteer at the NHS, and a local resident here in Sea Houses. I was really impressed with some of the stories, particularly from the NHSN speaker earlier on, where we were talking about some of the work they're doing in terms of encouraging young people and getting people involved. One of the things that concerns me, though, that same talk that really impressed me was very metropolitan-based. We've got a museum that's based in Newcastle. If you happen to live where I live, here in Sea Houses, that's 60 miles away. The reality is we've got, in that story, an awful lot of people, an awful lot of children in socially deprived environments that the NHSN campaign was working on. Sometimes, though, folks, we forget how deprived the coast and rural areas are. We're actually, if you live in Sea Houses, a 40-mile round trip from our nearest supermarket. We're actually about the same distance from our nearest high school. The reality is it's not actually about focusing on metropolitan areas. It's not about focusing on the cities. It's not about focusing on Ashington. I'm not doubting that Ashington has social deprivation, but Ashington is part of a conurbation that is easy to access. Far less easy to access are rural and coastal areas. And I'd just like to remind the panel, and I'm sure that the AONB don't need that reminder because the AONB are quite familiar with this, that this is an area of quite significant social deprivation. I'm lucky enough to live in it. I'm lucky enough to be happy waking up in the morning and thinking, isn't this a lovely place to be? But I'm part of a import here. I'm one of those retired people you were talking about. I'm one of those people who are here from a fortunate basis. If I was young, if I was looking for a job, if I was looking for employment, here in the coastal areas or in the rural areas, this is actually a very deprived area. Don't just focus on the cities. Don't just focus on Ashington. You need to raise your game, and you need to be looking at how to get our local kids involved in saving the world and saving the planet. No question. That was all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Mick. any comments? Or?
Well, that's the primary focus of the North Midlands A&B team, is working with kids in and around the A&B, and I'm sure it's the same for you as well. But it's a team game, we need to be reaching everybody.
Yeah. Dave.
I'll just stand up, easier. One suggestion for Ian, which is something we've harped on for ages, but maybe not Ian actually, but maybe to Northumberland Tourism. We've got holiday accommodation. Why can't we have a simple tourist tax? Every person, every night, pay £1 in the budget. Take it on, Ian.
Good idea.
So our emerging sustainable tourism travel strategy, which embeds sustainable tourism in it, has basically suggested just that. So the first thing is to take revenue from car parking, but not revenue that's generated now that goes off to fix all sorts of things the council need to fix, but to add to that, add 76 pence to the car parking fee, and that would fund our public transport aspirations and take lots and lots of cars off the road. If you then add £1 per night, per bed, per place in the A1B or surrounding area, all of a sudden you've got a massive budget to deal with your sustainable tourism issues and to make it a truly sustainable destination. But there's no appetite in the government for a tourist tax. So whilst we would think it's a good thing, even regionally we might think it's a good thing, the current government don't think it's a good thing. Voluntary, yeah. I mean, that's probably the approach we'll have to take, is trying to get businesses on board. So certainly in terms of the sustainable travel strategy, that's one of the approaches we're going to take, is to build momentum behind this. We've already had really good conversations with Alnwick Castle, and we want to build on that. So we've got all the big destinations and the big tourism bodies behind us, and then it's very difficult to turn that around once we've got that support. And then, lead down to individual smaller businesses like yourselves. But the more voices we've got saying that, the more chance we've got of delivering it. And if it has to be easy for the businesses to do, we have to develop a model that's easy for them to contribute. But yeah. So it's not just transport and travel and easing the burden there, but it's supporting things like Coast Care. So originally we always had a plan that there would be some kind of visitor payback scheme. It has to be easy. It has to be easy for the businesses to do. The will's there, and the will of the people visiting the Northumberland coast would be to, at the end of your stay, have you had a nice time? Would you contribute £1? Yeah, here's a £5. Same with you stop them at the end of the Northumberland coast path when they reach Berwick. Have you had a nice walk? Yeah, give us a £10. There you go. We've had a great time. You missed that opportunity. Once they're home, you're not going to get that £10. You have to literally be waiting at the end of the bridge for them. And that's the difficulty. It's how do you do that? What's the mechanism that makes it easy for businesses? But yes, it is on our agenda.
Do you know what I think? I think we need to learn to care for ourselves, and then we'd care for nature. That's where it needs to start. It needs to start with all of our hearts. That's where we're all going wrong.
Thank you, Alice. Another question? You moved your hand then, didn't you? Any farmers, Chris asks? We had the farming conference this morning, of course. Okay.
I was asking about whether there are any farmers here, because I think it is so important that we're engaging with as many farmers and land managers as we can. One of the great things about working with the Blackett Ord family at High Helbeck, and the RSPB will back me up on this, occasionally we would say, this project, and they would say, it might be a project for you, but it's our life for us. This is the legacy we're trying to leave for our kids. And to always remember that, I think, is really, really important. And there's an enormous role for farmers and for farm animals in nature recovery, we're always talking about having fewer of these things, but we mustn't get to a point where we don't have any of them, because grazing livestock can be incredibly important for nature. I've got a friend who has a castle in Spain. Well, she looks after a castle in Spain. She doesn't have one. She's got goats grazing her moat before anybody calls the RSPB. The RSPCA, the moat is empty and is scrubbing up. And this is a place where you want to be able to see the impact, the historic environment. So the goats are doing a great job. Browsing and grazing animals can be incredibly important, and as you've seen in the Dorset example as well. So there's an awful lot of farmer bashing that happens, but they are absolutely part of the solution.
Yeah, thank you for those closing comments, Chris, and just share a few thank yous now as our forum draws to a close. I'd like to thank the venue, Sea Houses Hub, excellent venue. The IT and the setup here has served our purposes very well. Say thank you to our speakers. That's Benedict, Heather, Claire and Chris for being so enlightening and informative, knowing their subjects and sharing their stories and their thoughts with us. The Coast Care volunteers here today who've been helping out with the tea, the coffee and the car parking. When I ran events, the hardest thing to do was organise the car parking. And so thank you to the Coast Care volunteers. So the AONB team, to Ian and the team for organising this, getting out the invitations, so organising everything here, that all the stuff you see that's gone on around you in the background. Ian Moulton, what did I write down there? Yes, Ian Multicord, who's done the sound and vision. We've done the vision, I think. And the sound, okay. So the cameras and the microphones and the loudspeakers and so on. And Phil from the venue, who's kept everything working. And finally, Anstead Farm, who've done the cakes today. I like cakes, and I guess there probably aren't many cakes left, so thanks for that. And thank you for coming on a cold end of November day, and we look forward to welcoming you back in 2023 to our next annual forum. You can follow the Northumberland Coast AONB via their website. I do try and encourage people, if they see Coast Care are very active on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook and on Twitter. So if you see a post from them, say thanks for what they do. Our coast and our coastal areas will be a lot, less tidy. But it's about litter, isn't it, really, I guess. So I always click on like, or sometimes pass on a comment to say thank you for the outstanding work that the Coast Care do. And all that, of course, is down to absolutely to the AONB team. And again, as Chris has indicated, a part of a family of AONBs, of which there are 34, all doing work like this, nature recovery, engaging with communities, engaging with government, engaging with agencies to make our areas of outstanding natural beauty great place to work, live, learn and play. And I'll finish it there. Have a safe journey home, and I look forward to seeing you. Oh, there's cake left. Right. There is cake left. I guess if you want a bit of cake to take home for friends and family, grab a bit of cake. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, too, for coming here today. Thank you.